Millennials. The dreaded word, millennials. Typically, millennials are people who were born in the late 80s to the early 90s, often credited as lazy, naive, brainwashed idiots entitled, worthless, killing all sorts in industry, and without a doubt, the worst generation ever to grace our planet. Some often would describe people of that nature as simply a sad adult human being. Before I start, just for the record, I am technically a millennial, if you haven't already guessed, and I don't really care much for the term or many terms in general, or the terms people associate with me. And I don't really see the point as labeling myself as anything, as I'm constantly changing as a human being. But I suppose for this instance, I am a millennial. But with that said, I wanted to figure out, why do people have such a drastic, horrible view on millennials? And in my research, I found something that had quite the opposite approach to millennials, which was rather interesting and refreshing at the same time. Also, for the record, I found this quite a while back and I can't find the original source, so I apologize for that. And this is a bit of a mismatch interpretation of what they said in the first place. So, apologies for that. Millennials, quite simply, are the in-between generation. They grew up during a technological revolution. They have such a huge nostalgia of their childhood because when it started, it was them playing outside, running around like animals in the woods and the forests and the cities and the town streets and everything like that. Just like their parents, using skateboards, jump ropes, chalk on the sidewalk and the ground and the walls and all that jazz. They grew up in a time when computers were very big, bulky things the size of small tables. Then as they grew older, technology started to advance at a rate like we've never seen before. The computing power in your phone alone right now is more than what it took, drastically more than what it took to send a rocket into space, which is insane. Our video games today are hundreds of gigabytes, and we have access to movies, news, TV, and the entirety of humanity's knowledge at the touch of our fingers. To be fair, these days you'll be hard-pressed to find any kids out in the playground except after dark, or a kid without a smart device, for that matter. Not only that, but millennials are also extremely nostalgic of the simple, carefree childhood before all the tech, which is something that most of them can remember. So much changed over the course of their childhood, such as society and how we interact with each other by the means of the internet and mobile phones, to the everyday access to more and more complicated and advanced technology that is continuously changing our lives and how we live our lives. Millennials are the in-between generation. Their parents grew up with much less tech than them. They grew up knowing none to very little to everything all at once in just the space of a few years. The children today and their future children are submerged in technology, from society, home, school, work. Everything and everywhere is somehow integrated with some form of technology that was not available 10 to 15 years ago. They're nostalgic because their childhood, the simpler time before the tech, seems like a lifetime ago, when in reality it was only 10 to 15 years ago. To them, it's almost looking back at a time machine, even though in reality it was not that long ago. It's like looking at the phones we have today and then looking at the old Blackberries, the very first Blackberry. It's quite a big change, to be fair. Or the old Nokias. Yeah, it's almost like going back in a time machine. Those things still work, surprisingly. A few examples are chalk on the sidewalk to video games. Magazines and scraps of newspapers that we would have looked at when our parents were finished at them, to nowadays just looking at the internet. From playing outside from dawn to dusk to video games bigger than some countries. From computers the size of a small table to now smaller than the palm of your hand. From phones the size of a cinder block, small enough to fit in the pocket on your shirt. But it is more than that. A lot of millennials are bitter. They're bitter because the promises that were given to others in previous generations no longer exist. College debt existing half your life with sometimes very little chance to pay it off, or getting the job you chose the degree for, due to shortages in jobs or lack of experience. The circular logic of needing a job to get experience, or needing experience to get a job. Housing and renting prices beyond anything we've ever seen. Fewer marriages and more divorce rates and broken families since the 60s. Millennials are, quite frankly, nostalgic and bitter at the same time. They are more creative due to seeing the world from 3 different perspectives growing up. Without tech, start of the implementation of tech, and all the technology. They are more resourceful. An example of that would be using loopholes to achieve goals or to even get jobs. They changed marketing on a global scale because marketing no longer works. The traditional sense of marketing no longer works on the average millennial. It's vastly more different than it was for previous generations. That's why marketing companies today are having such a difficult time selling their wares to millennials. They changed who got popular and who got famous, despite what Hollywood wanted. With the advent of the internet, they chose who became famous from everyday individuals through things such as memes or YouTube or Twitter or Twitch or Instagram. And through that, they were also able to choose who fell out of fame through terrible practices throughout their careers and exposing terrible practices throughout their careers. They adapt to the world and what's in the world faster than any other generation due to the nature of how they grew up. They stay informed by reading and watching and listening to multiple different sources of news and different sides of the spectrum to find the truth. Well, some do. They are more independent thinkers due to the nature of the internet and having access to the world's history and varying sides of truth, and are able to make their own minds up faster and more accurately than a lot of others due to the nature of how much information is out there and how easy that information is to access. They are more entrepreneurial in spirit, as they've created entire industries that were never thought even possible before. They've changed the very aspect of how to make a paycheck. They are a generation that, despite the downfalls, strive to not just work, but also have an impact, no matter how small that impact is in their work. That one in particular kind of struck me because it does seem to resonate with quite a lot of people I know that are technically a millennial, which is a very interesting thing. Obviously, it's still, in other generations as well, but it does seem more prevalent in millennials. They are, despite the bitterness and the disappointment, the generation who is hopeful for the future. And they are the ones at this point in time creating the future right now through the businesses, technology, and society that's being developed. It is a common trend that every generation says something bad about the rest. It's kind of how the cycle goes. Generations always talk about the previous and future generations as if their own generation was something truly special, but the reality is we develop on the things that the generation passes down to us. And what we pass on to the next generation is how theirs will develop as well. Each generation is different, and we progress and change and make new advances and new failures. Some bigger and better or just outright horrifying. And it is very likely already that my generation is making fun of previous ones and future ones and talking down to both. That's kind of how it works. All generations like to make fun of the other generations. All in all, it's not that bad being a millennial. Quite a few of us are hardworking, passionate, creative, and will make great strides in our lives. If anything, you may as well move on with your life and not care so much for the labels that you're given, to be fair. But I did think that was a very interesting take on the concept of millennials. It does seem that a lot of people are just talking down to millennials, when in reality, we have been given a very interesting hand. We've grown up during the housing bubble, grown up during a couple of recessions, amongst many other political and just worldwide interesting events, to say the least. Thankfully, we haven't had to deal with something like a world war or some horrible stuff like that. We do all still have our issues in this day and age. The good thing about us being where we are right now is we have access to the internet. We have access to make a paycheck, sitting at home, doing our own kind of work, or, creating art, etc., whatever it may be. The possibilities right now, because of the advancement of technology we're very blessed. And I've said this in multiple different videos, but we are in the most technologically advanced part in human history, and anything but the sky is the limit. Or the sky is the limit, and anything goes. I think I messed that up. Well, that's all I have to say about that. I did think it was a very interesting take, and I do agree with most of it, although maybe I'm just being biased. Who knows? I'm sure people will tell me the difference. But that's all I have for now. All the best, thanks for watching, and I'll see you Monday. Bye.